talking about. Definitions vary based on the problem domain, the methodology that the business analyst works in. So environment has a lot to do with it. Business requirements, user requirements, functional requirements, quality and service requirements, assumptions and constraints, implementation requirements. Now, you hear a lot of requirements, because that's the main role of the business analyst. And we're going to look at the processes that's in the BA BOC. All right? Now, I like to do functional requirements a little different, and I think what's missing here is the attributes, because sometimes I found that what works best for me is to look at a functional requirement and number that, but there's attributes related to that. And a functional requirement may be, we're going to produce a software package that keeps track of people's hours. Okay? Now, an attribute may be, this has got to be easy to use. Does that make sense? It's related to that functional requirement, and constraint means we're putting a number to it. That easy to use means something, and that's the constraint. A person with a 6th grade education with a 10-minute training course can use this. That's what the definition of easy to use is. So that's the way I like to look at requirements. And I don't see that in the
I think some people call them non-functional requirements.
Yeah, there are, and you can see quality and service and assumptions and constraints, and so user requirements. There's a lot of ways we could define those, aren't there? And those aren't defined very well even in the information. Okay, let's see what else we got. Now these are the knowledge areas. Remember, PMBOK has knowledge areas. The BABOK has knowledge areas. And the first one up there is enterprise analysis. And I'm going to read kind of around what it says. It says pre-project or early project activities and approaches for capturing the necessary view of the business to provide context to requirements and functional design work. And a given, what it means is that we're trying to understand what the company needs done in order to be successful to meet the company goals. And it happens long before a project. It happens more along the lines of, if we're going to think about project management, what is the portfolio we're putting together that these projects fit into? What's our selection for the projects we're going to go for? The next one says requirement planning and management, and it says up there, defines the resources and the tasks associated with planning and management of the requirements gathering activities. So we're actually doing project management, trying to figure out how we're going to do how we're going to come up with the requirements. So in large companies, you may have more than one BA. You may have a team of BAs doing this. So now I got to figure out my resources. I got to figure out who is doing what and what they're going to do, so we don't cross over and get in each other's way. We don't irritate our stakeholders by asking them the same question 3 times and things like that. We've got to plan all that out, right? And then requirement elicitation defines the standards, techniques used in a collection of requirements. How are we going to go find this? Some of these, in the past, what I've done was I've looked at putting together pictures. I said, well, here's a flow chart of what we're doing. Is that really what's happening? Then I'll say, well, that's what you think's happening. So now I ask you, because you do the same work. 6 of you do the same work. So I ask you, is that really going to happen? Well, what am I using? I'm using a flow chart to understand what we're doing, right? And then I may use pictures, like I may say, is this what you want this web page to look like? And it may be done by graphics. So there's a whole bunch of different ways. We've got to decide how we're going to do that, how we're going to ask questions. Are we going to do it in survey form? We're going to do it by face-to-face, which is best. And what kind of pictures we use. Requirement communication defines the method, tools, and techniques used to structure the raw data collected during the requirements elicitation. We identify the gaps, information. What else do we need to know that we don't know? We found all this. What do we need to know that the developers need to know in order to get this done, right? And then requirements analysis documentation. Collection activities, considerations for expressing output and requirements, and how we're going to document this, and how we're going to communicate that, how we're going to analyze that. Okay, so can you see a little bit of changes? It's a little confusing, but there's a lot there, right? And the very last, the solution assessment and validation, we're going to actually make sure those requirements have been met. Okay? So now, that's a little hard to see, but this may be a little easier to see. If we think about the enterprise analysis, that's way before the change happens. If we think about requirement planning and management, that's before the change happens, and it actually starts going into the concept phase of the project. Okay? Elicitation is before the project happens and actually starts going to the concept phase and into the planning phase of the project. Requirements communication, well, that's before, during, and after. We're going to communicate this all along the way. If you look at requirement analysis and documentation, that's really before and during, because we got to get all that out of the way before we start working on the project and into the project when we're actually working on the project. So planning and implementation, requirements analysis, well, that's planning. Solution assessment and validation, well, that's during and after. We're not talking about validating our requirements here. We're talking about validating our requirements. We start incorporating into the project. We start doing the implementation and the planning. We got to make sure they're incorporated in the planning. We got to make sure they're incorporated in implementation. And we got to make sure they're incorporated correctly by the time we close it out. Does that make sense? So that was real helpful to me to see that, or to work on that. I actually came up with it, so I can be wrong. This is my disclosure. This is the way I see it. All right, now this is just a picture of all of that. And this is another picture of all of that, if you want to put it in some kind of picture. But now let's compare it to the body of knowledge, and then let's compare it to project management. That will fit throughout the whole project management life cycle. And if we want to look at before, during, and after, remember I said the enterprise is way over here. The requirements are starting where the project begins. So let's compare that to the project management part itself. So if we're to look at the concept phase, these actually overlap concept phase and into planning here, and then solutions actually we're starting to weave it all the way through. Does that make sense? Is that a good slide? That helps me to put it in some kind of order where I can see. You have a question in the back? Okay. Now, another thing I think happens a lot of times is that the BA's job is not complete when the project manager's job is complete. All the time. So the BA can go further. And they have to incorporate it into the plans of the business and update plans and things like that. Does that go along with your experiences, or am I wrong, or have you other experiences, or what are you thinking right now? It may take a little digestion, and then probably tonight you'll say, hey, he was wrong there. He was wrong.